Live text access. Training for real-time intralingual subtitlers. Unit 5 Respeaking. Element 2 Metalinguistic skills. Turning nonverbal and visual verbal elements into written. Typing, dictating, punctuation while keeping the pace of the speaker. On completion of this training sequence, you will be able to produce coherent text while re-speaking by extracting and combining the information conveyed with the speaker's material. Identify which nonverbal elements needs to be turned into verbal for each LTA-trained working context by applying techniques like changing colors or font size or inserting labels. Type, dictate, punctuation while keeping the pace of the speaker. This is the agenda of this presentation. I will first recall the skills of the speaker, to then concentrate on the metalinguistic skills with a focus on the dictation of punctuation, which is essential during a speaking performance because it improves text's functionality in terms of accuracy, readability, and legibility of transcripts. I will finally focus on main punctuation characters that you will be requested to practice along the course to develop, reinforce, and maintain the skills at hand. Section 1. The challenging speaker. As you have seen, every speaker has to do many things at the same time. In Element 2, LO1, we have dealt with metalinguistic skills, meaning all those skills related to being able to improve textual, verbalization, and dictation skills at the same time, which is another set of skills every speaker has to possess. In particular, for every speaker to be able and become a professional in the field, he or she has also to be able to process and guarantee a good functionality of the final product, thus to guarantee accuracy, readability, and legibility of the text produced. This all involves first and foremost the ability of the speaker to perform a good analysis, synthesis, and reformulation of the speaker's discourse. While you can only develop these competencies by the time and thanks to ad hoc exercises, you may be interested in knowing how these metalinguistic skills work. Indeed, this is exactly what we are going to see in the next section. In this element, element 2, we will deal with dictation of punctuation. Section 2. Functionality of the text. As we know, and as in any multitasking process which involves doing different things at the same time, in re-speaking too, two main types of skills are involved: understanding, aimed at comprehending the source text, and re-speaking itself, aimed at making the most out of understanding under stressful conditions and with a reduced processing capacity than usual. Typing, dictating punctuation while keeping the pace of the speaker is another important skill in order to render the functionality of the final re-spoken text. Important to such a good performance are the ability to understand the communicative intention of the source message, to understand the red thread of the discourse, the capacity to select and focalize the relevant information and to divide between main and secondary ideas, and to deliver an accurate oral punctuation. More, the capacity to identify the discourse connectors while deducing meaning through context and extra-linguistic elements. Last but not least, the ability to condense information and to segment information in sense unit. This is the result of a good mix of accuracy, readability, and legibility of the text produced as a final text. In the case of re-speaking, the most common method used to evaluate the quality of subtitles produced in real time consists of assessing accuracy. Needless to say, where quality is concerned, there are also a number of other features to be considered, such as delay, positioning, character identification, and speed, as well as factors relating to their reception by readers, for example, comprehension or perception. Readability is about arranging words or groups of words in a way that allows the reader eye to access the content easily and in a way that makes sense. It is important to understand what makes one typeface more legible than another. But basically, legibility is the quality deriving from a text which can be read and understood without much effort, also meaning that the message can fully and immediately reach the recipient. And the main rules to follow when dictating the text are dictating in an orderly manner while still keeping the pace of the speaker and making sentences which are not too long. Punctuation plays a paramount role in this structuring of the text. Section 3. Type, dictate, punctuation. We have already highlighted that using punctuation in re-speaking improves the readability and usability of transcripts. As a fact, punctuation used in the right place significantly improves the readability of transcripts and reduces the time it takes to edit them. It is the use of special marks to enable readers to understand a piece of writing. Good punctuation follows the rhythms of speech, telling the reader to pause at the right points and to organize the information in the document that he or she is reading. It reduces misunderstandings and makes the writing clear. But how important is punctuation really, and which are the most commonly used punctuation characters in real-time subtitling? We are now going to dive into its importance in transcription, describing how we intend and how we use punctuation. First of all, it is important to highlight that punctuation marks fall under the domains of both verbal communication and non-verbal communication, which includes any communication act except speech. In particular, full stop, comma, exclamation mark, and question mark are the marks used within the real-time subtitled communication context, and other signs, such as parentheses, quotation marks, ellipses, and others, are the signs used for the nonverbal communication. Specifically, for the nonverbal communication context, what I will explain will be a general overview, but it is important to bear in mind that the use of punctuation marks depends on the country of reference, meaning that in different countries we make a different use of the punctuation marks, while, on the other hand, the punctuation marks pertaining to the verbal communication are generally shared in their use. A full stop marks the end of a complete sentence that is not a question or an exclamation. It looks like other marks such as decimal points and abbreviation points in acronyms, but it does a different job. It ends a unit of sense and marks a similar but longer pause in the reading process than commas do. When re-speaking, you can also use periods at the end of phrases that are not fully sentences. For example, I like to break my writing up, full stop. You know, full stop. Obviously, in re-speaking, subtitles and lines are to be broken at logical points. The ideal line break will be at a piece of punctuation like a full stop, more than a comma. If the break has to be elsewhere in the sentence, then the re-speaker avoids splitting the following parts of speech. Article and noun, for example, the plus table, or a plus book. Preposition and following phrases, for example, on plus the table, in plus away, about plus his life. Conjunction and following phrases or clause, for example, and plus those books, or but plus I went there. Pronoun and verb, for example, he plus is, they plus will come, it plus comes. Parts of a complex verb, have plus eaten, will plus have plus been plus doing, and so on. Commas break sentences up into smaller parts that are easier to understand. They signify natural pauses, segregate pieces of information, and separate items in a list, whether nouns or adjectives. We use comma for pausing for breath. You can use a comma to insert a natural break between two parts of a sentence or to join two short sentences. For example, he ran down the street as fast as he could, comma, and tripped over his shoelaces. Here, the comma, together with and conjunction, joins the two sentences. He ran down the street as fast as he could, and he tripped over his shoelaces. Commas of this kind reflect the fact that you sometimes need to pause your train of thought to make sense of the words. We also use comma to inserting additional information. Commas are also useful when you want to insert groups of words that are new information to a sentence, but which don't change its basic meaning. For example, Michael, comma, who was taller than James, comma, was the eldest of children. Michael was the eldest of the children makes sense on its own, but commas allows you to add the fact that Michael was taller than James, without simply sticking it awkwardly on the end of the sentence. More, we use comma to separating items in lists. You can also use commas to separate items in lists. In fact, one fixed rule is that lists of 3 or more items need a comma between the first and second items. A comma is also needed between the second and third items if the list has 4 items, and so on. The exclamation point is a mark of punctuation in verbal communication. To be effective, the exclamation point should be used in moderation. At the end of a sentence, the exclamation mark is a mark of terminal punctuation. As such, it should not be followed by a period or question mark. Some will use both a question mark and exclamation point for an exclamatory question, but only the exclamation point is truly necessary. For example, "What in the world are you doing up there?" exclamation mark. The question mark is used at the end of a direct question. Indirect questions take a period. For example, "What is she doing tonight?" question mark. Or, "I wonder what she's doing tonight." Full stop. When a direct question occurs within a larger sentence, it takes a question mark. Note in the example, "Would they make it on time?" question mark, she wondered. Full stop. The colon has grammatical uses but also non-grammatical uses. Grammatically, it is used to introduce a list of items. For example, the bookstore specializes in 3 subjects, colon, art, comma, architecture, comma, and graphic design, full stop. In real-time subtitling and as for the non-grammatical uses, the colon is used in order to introduce a direct speech which cannot be turned into indirect speech. For example, she said, colon, "What's your name?" question mark, instead of she asked what her name was. Moreover, colon is used for quoting citations only in some countries, among which is Italy. Other countries use quotation marks instead. As for the nonverbal communication, again, it is important to remark that what I will explain will be a general overview. However, it is important to bear in mind that the use of punctuation marks depends on the country the real-time subtitler works for, meaning that in different countries, he or she makes a different use of the punctuation marks. While, on the other hand, the punctuation marks pertaining to the verbal communication are generally shared in their use. The nonverbal communication punctuation marks may include parentheses in Italy or brackets in UK and USA, quotation marks, ellipses in Italy or dashes in UK, and other signs always according to the country in question, for example, signs major or minor than. We will now see these signs, the so-called paragraphemathic signs for the nonverbal communication. The parentheses indicate additional information or concepts which are different from the spoken discourse. Important to say is that bracketed information should be an addition, not a substitution. For example, parenthesis, Michael laughs, intends to pass the concept that besides the verbal speech, something is happening which cannot be respoken by the real-time subtitler. Also, if a quotation includes a foreign word or phrase that might not be understood, parentheses provide a translation to better understand the meaning of the whole sentence. For example, I seldom spoke in French class. When I did, I usually just said je ne sais pas. Parentheses, I don't know. Quotation marks clarify written language for both readers and writers by marking quotations, titles, translations, and other words and phrases. In respeaking, quotation marks perform the following basic functions. Enclose direct quotations. Direct quotations are quotations that are repeated verbatim. For example, President Franklin Roosevelt said, quotation mark, the United States of America have been suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Quotation marks, full stop. Or titles of works. Use quotation marks with titles, works, and parts of wholes. For example, the first chapter in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is, quotation mark, the boy who lived, quotation marks, full stop. Or highlight novel uses of words and phrases. Use quotation marks around words and phrases to indicate a special sense of use. For example, the motherboard is sometimes considered the quotation mark brain quotation mark of a computer. Again, there is an importance to note to make here. In Italy, quotation marks are not used to cite. Rather, speakers use colon. In other countries, they are used instead within these different uses. An ellipsis is a set of 3 periods, indicating an omission. It is also used for omitted material within quoted sentence. For example, Jane argues that by simplifying one's life, the laws of the universe will appear less complex. Ellipsis. At the same time, dashes are used in the place of ellipses to mean that someone has been interrupted while speaking. Again, a specific difference for the Anglo-Saxon countries. After this overview, a real-time subtitler should bear in mind the concept that verbal communication and non-verbal communications are featured by several and different punctuation marks. The fundamentals in these distinctions is that verbal marks of punctuation are almost shared in all countries, while they are country-specific in non-verbal communication, and they can change accordingly. Summary. In this LO, we have introduced the main competence of the speaker, the metalinguistic skill in the form of dictation of punctuation as one important feature guaranteeing the functionality of a text in respeaking. In particular, we have dealt with 2 important aspects, a theoretical one, that is the text functionality, whose characteristics are accuracy, readability, and legibility, and then a more practical one, on the use of the most important punctuation characters used by the speaker, both for verbal and non-verbal communication, in order to deliver an optimal target text to the reader. This too has to become a mechanic and automatized action when speaking. To do so, dictating punctuation is the exercise to start with. In homework session, we will see how to do this in practice. Exercises. Exercises. The exercises for the video lecture are in the trainer's guide and the PowerPoint file.
LTA Live Text Access, Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona. SDI, Internationale Hochschule, Scuola Superiore per Mediatori Linguistici, ZDF Digital, European Federation of Hard of Hearing People FHO, Velotype, Subti Access, European Certification and Qualification Association ECQA, co-funded by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union. Erasmus Plus project 2018-1-DE01-KA203-004218. The information and views set on this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official opinion of the European Union. Neither the European Union institutions and bodies, nor any person acting on their behalf, may be held responsible for the use which may be made of the information contained here.